Have you ever experienced a moment when life seemed full of promise, only to be turned upside down by unimaginable loss? Emma, a devoted mother, stood at her daughter Claire's grave, her heart weighed down by years of grief. But on a fateful day, something unexpected happened. A fragile girl wept at the grave, unlocking a mystery that would change everything. What began as sorrow became a journey of hope, healing, and redemption. Watch until the end to see how this touching story unfolds and discover how love can light the way even in the darkest moments. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. The elderly woman, bent with the weight of years and sorrow, found herself standing before an unfamiliar scene that sent chills down her spine. A fragile girl, barely more than a whisper in the wind, was weeping at her daughter's grave. Her sobs cut through the quiet of the cemetery, piercing the air like shards of glass. Emma felt a knot tighten in her chest as she hesitantly moved closer, her heart pounding with an unease she couldn't quite explain. What she overheard made her blood run cold. Emma's footsteps echoed through the desolate pathways of Phoenix Cemetery. Each step seemed to draw out memories she wished she could bury with the dead. In one hand, she clutched a bouquet of white lilies, the flowers Claire had loved so dearly. In the other, she held a crumpled photograph, worn from years of handling and tears. Her tired eyes, heavy with grief, focused on the familiar headstone looming ahead. It bore her daughter's name, Claire Scott. Kneeling before the grave, Emma felt the sharp ache in her bones, a physical reminder of the weight she carried. With trembling hands, she placed the flowers and photo against the cold, unyielding stone, as if hoping to revive even the smallest part of her daughter's spirit. "Another year, my sweet girl," she whispered, her voice fragile, barely holding back the torrent of emotions that threatened to spill over. "It feels like only yesterday you were here laughing, breathing, living. How I wish things had been different." Her fingers traced the outline of Claire's face in the photograph, lingering on the once bright eyes now frozen in time. Each stroke brought with it a flood of memories of Claire's radiant smiles, warm embraces, and the unbearable goodbyes that led to the moment she was taken from her. Claire had been a force of light and energy, a 28-year-old with a future as bright as the sun. Her talent as a graphic designer was admired by all who knew her, but it was her infectious laughter and kind heart that truly set her apart. The news of her death, abrupt, cruel, and devastating, had shattered the lives of those who loved her, but none more so than her mother. The accident that claimed Claire's life had been described as a freak tragedy, a slick road, a sharp turn, and in an instant, she was gone. Emma had accepted those explanations at the time, unable to confront the overwhelming grief that followed. But every visit to this graveyard reopened wounds that never seemed to heal. The empty space Claire left behind was like a black hole, consuming everything Emma had left. Claire was her only child, her only family, and now Emma stood in the world alone, lost in a fog of despair that never seemed to lift. The cemetery had become a sacred place for her, a place where she could feel close to the daughter she had lost. But with each visit, the pain seemed to deepen, as if the grave itself was pulling her further into its dark, relentless grip. "They say time heals all wounds, but it's a lie," Emma murmured, her voice cracking under the weight of her sorrow. "The pain, it only gets worse with each passing year." Her gaze fell to the inscription on the headstone, the words "beloved daughter," etched into the stone like a cruel reminder of all she had lost. "Was there something I could have done to save you, Claire? Did I fail you somehow? Oh, how I miss you, my darling. I miss you so much." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she let the questions, the guilt, and the longing wash over her, speaking to the daughter who could no longer answer. Just then, the quiet was shattered by the sound of soft, heart-wrenching sobs. Emma looked up, startled, and her gaze fell upon a small girl, her tiny shoulders shaking with grief. The child's whispered words drifted through the air like a mournful melody. "Mommy, why did you leave me? I miss you so much. I need you. Please come back." Tears poured down the girl's face as she clung to the grave, her voice filled with the same aching loss that consumed Emma's heart. Moved by a deep sense of empathy and maternal instinct, Emma rose slowly to her feet, her knees creaking in protest. She approached the girl cautiously, her heart aching for the child who seemed so small and fragile in her sorrow. "Sweetheart," Emma called gently, her voice trembling with compassion. "Are you all right, dear? Where is your family?" The girl lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked at Emma with an expression that spoke of endless sadness, a look far too old for someone so young. The grief they shared in that moment transcended words, two souls bound by their love and loss, standing side by side in the shadow of death. "I always come here," the little girl sobbed, her small voice quivering with each word. "This is my mommy's grave, but I don't understand why there's a different name on it. It says Claire Scott, but that's not her name. I'm so confused." Her innocent confusion struck Emma with the force of a blow, sending a shiver down her spine. The day had already been heavy with grief, but this unexpected mystery only deepened the weight she carried in her heart. Emma's heart twisted with empathy as she slowly lowered herself to sit beside the child. The soft earth beneath her seemed to mirror the sadness they both shared, as though even the ground itself held the sorrow of the souls resting beneath it. Placing an arm around the girl's delicate shoulders, Emma spoke gently, her voice filled with warmth. "Let's try to make sense of this together, sweetheart," she said, her words a quiet promise of support. "What's your name?" The girl sniffled, wiping her tear-streaked cheeks with the back of her hand. "Samantha," she whispered, a faint, fragile smile breaking through the sadness. "My name is Samantha Lewis." Emma nodded, a newfound determination settling in her chest. She had spent years grieving, feeling powerless in the face of her own loss, but perhaps helping this little girl might provide a sense of purpose, a way to make peace with the shadows that still lingered in her own soul. "Samantha," Emma said softly, her voice carrying a note of tender encouragement, "why don't you tell me more about your mommy? Maybe together we can figure out why this name is here." Samantha hesitated for a moment, her small hands clutching the handkerchief Emma had offered her. She glanced up at Emma, searching her kind eyes for reassurance before beginning to speak. "My mommy, her name was Anna Lewis," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft breeze that stirred the cemetery's silence. "She always smiled at me. She used to sing lullabies when I couldn't sleep." Samantha's gaze dropped to the ground as she continued, her words laced with heartache. "But she got sick. Really sick. I was only 5 when she passed away. They told me she was buried here, in this cemetery, and I've been coming ever since." Emma's heart clenched painfully at the story, a deep sadness welling up within her for this child who had lost so much so young. Just as Emma was about to speak, a man appeared in the distance, walking slowly toward them. His weary expression mirrored the confusion and grief that seemed to permeate the air. "Samantha," the man called softly, his voice trembling with emotion. As he approached, he gave Emma a small nod of acknowledgement. "I'm her father, Jorge," he explained, the lines on his face deepening with a mix of sorrow and frustration. "I've been bringing Samantha here for years, always telling her that her mother was resting here, that this place was where she could find peace." His gaze turned to the headstone, his brow furrowing. "But I never understood why the name on the grave was different. I always assumed it was some sort of mistake, bureaucratic maybe. But now I'm not so sure." Jorge's words hung in the air, adding to the mystery that seemed to weave itself around them. Emma glanced at the name on the headstone once more, Claire Scott, and felt an unsettling sensation creep up her spine. How could two families, bound by the same cemetery, be tied to a grave that bore the name of neither of their loved ones? Emma's mind raced with questions, and her heart swelled with a protective instinct toward both the girl and her father. "I think," Emma began, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within her. "There's more to this than we realize. We need to find out what happened, for all of us, for Claire, for Anna, and for you, Samantha." She looked at Jorge, determination gleaming in her eyes. "We need answers." Samantha nestled closer to Emma, seeking comfort in the warmth of her presence. And as Emma gently stroked the girl's hair, she felt a shift within herself, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Perhaps, in helping this family unravel the truth, she might finally find some peace of her own. Jorge's gaze lingered on the headstone, his eyes filled with a mixture of grief and bewilderment. "Anna was our whole world," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "When she passed, it felt like the ground beneath us had shattered. After the funeral, I never received any official paperwork, just verbal confirmations from the hospital and the funeral home. When I saw the name Claire Scott engraved here instead of Anna's, I didn't know what to believe. We were drowning in sorrow, and I failed to question what was right in front of me." His voice cracked under the weight of regret, the years of unanswered questions etched into every word. Emma listened intently, her heart aching for Jorge and Samantha. She understood their pain all too well, the unrelenting ache of loss, the confusion that lingered long after the final goodbye. "Jorge," she said gently, but with a steely resolve in her voice, "I think something went terribly wrong here, and I won't rest until we uncover the truth. Not just for Claire, but for Anna, for you, and especially for Samantha." Her words carried a promise, a vow to not let this mystery remain unsolved. Jorge looked at Emma, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "Thank you, Emma," he whispered, his gratitude deep and sincere. "Having someone stand beside us, someone who understands, it means more than I can express. Samantha deserves to know where her mother truly rests. We both do." He placed a comforting hand on Samantha's shoulder, drawing her close. Samantha, in turn, leaned into her father's embrace, finding solace in the warmth and strength of his presence. Emma's chest tightened at the sight of them, her own memories of Claire flooding her mind. She knew the depths of that well, the endless pit of grief and uncertainty that swirled around them. No child should endure this kind of confusion, this agony of not knowing. With newfound determination, Emma spoke again, her voice strong and unwavering. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Jorge. We need to check the cemetery's records. There could have been an error, something overlooked. But whatever it is, we will uncover the truth." She cast a reassuring glance at Samantha, trying to project confidence and strength, hoping to offer the little girl a glimmer of hope in the midst of her pain. Together, they made their way toward the cemetery office, a small building tucked away at the edge of the grounds. The air was thick with tension, but also with a quiet sense of resolve. Emma's mind raced with possibilities, but she pushed the doubts aside, focusing on the task at hand. Once inside, Emma approached the desk, her voice firm and direct. "We need to see the burial records for the grave registered under the name Claire Scott," she said, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. "There's been a mix-up, and we need to clear this up for the sake of a grieving child who deserves to know the truth about her mother's final resting place." The cemetery employee looked up, startled by the intensity of Emma's request. After a moment of hesitation, the employee nodded, sensing the urgency in Emma's plea. "I'll pull up the records right away," the employee said, their hands already moving to retrieve the necessary files. Emma stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath shallow with anticipation. She glanced over at Jorge and Samantha, offering them a small, encouraging smile. This was the beginning of something, of answers, of closure, of justice for both families. Whatever secrets lay buried beneath those cold headstones, Emma was determined to uncover them. The employee, a weary-looking man with deep lines etched into his face, glanced up from the paperwork with a sigh, nodding in acknowledgement of the unusual nature of the request. His fingers danced across the keyboard as he began his search, muttering under his breath about how rare such confusions were. Emma stood beside Samantha, their hands clasped together, a shared lifeline in the tense silence. Every click of the keyboard seemed to echo through the small office, amplifying their anticipation. Emma glanced down at Samantha, who was nervously biting her lip, her small hand gripping tightly onto Emma's for comfort. "We'll get to the bottom of this, sweetheart," Emma whispered, offering the most reassuring smile she could muster. "No matter what we find, we'll face it together," Samantha nodded, her eyes brimming with a mixture of fear and hope as she squeezed Emma's hand in response. Minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last, until the employee's brow furrowed in surprise. He looked up from the screen, a mix of curiosity and concern coloring his expression. "It seems." He began slowly, choosing his words carefully. "There was an internal notice a few years ago regarding some confusion in the marking of graves. I can't give you specifics just yet, but there were documented errors. I'll need to investigate further." Emma's heart skipped a beat, a small surge of relief tempered by apprehension. There was hope for answers, but also the lingering fear of what those answers might reveal. "Please," she urged, her voice steady, but filled with urgency. "Do whatever you need to. We need to know the truth." The employee nodded again, promising to dig deeper into the records. Emma and Jorge exchanged grateful thanks before leading Samantha out of the office, a sense of uneasy progress settling over them. As they walked back through the cemetery grounds, Emma's mind buzzed with possibilities. She was one step closer to unraveling this tangled web of mistakes and secrets that had somehow connected her daughter's grave with another family's grief. But this was only the beginning, and she knew she needed professional help to navigate the complexities of what lay ahead. The very next day, Emma found herself sitting in the plush office of Dr. Rafael Adrian, a man whose calm and composed demeanor immediately set her at ease. His office was a sanctuary of order, with warm wood tones and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside Emma's mind. Dr. Adrian sat across from her, his eyes filled with quiet empathy as he listened attentively. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Dr. Adrian," Emma began, her voice tinged with the strain of months of uncertainty. "I'm here because of a very delicate and personal matter." Dr. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his expression one of genuine concern. "Please, Mrs. Adams, take your time. Tell me what's been troubling you." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself before diving into the story that had haunted her since the day she met Samantha at the cemetery. "There's a grave where my daughter is supposed to be buried, but now there are suspicions that someone else may be buried there instead. It's complicated," she admitted, her voice faltering slightly as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. "The name on the headstone is my daughter's, Claire Scott, but a little girl named Samantha believes it's the grave of her mother, Anna Lewis." Dr. Adrian nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of her words. "That does sound like a deeply troubling situation," he said gently. "But I believe we can get to the bottom of it. These kinds of errors, while rare, do happen. With some careful investigation, we can uncover the truth and bring clarity to both families." Emma felt a small flicker of hope at his words. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear that someone believed in a resolution, that there was still a path to the truth. "I just want to know where my daughter truly rests," she whispered, her voice filled with longing and the quiet pain that had accompanied her for so long. "And I want to help Samantha find peace too." Dr. Adrian smiled kindly, his calm voice steady and reassuring. "We'll take this one step at a time, Mrs. Adams. We'll begin by reviewing the cemetery records in detail, and then, if necessary, we'll involve other experts. But I promise you we won't stop until we've found the answers you're looking for." Emma nodded, feeling the smallest bit of tension release from her chest. She wasn't alone in this anymore. There was a glimmer of hope in the darkness, and for the first time in years, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could all find peace in the end. Dr. Adrian listened intently, his hands clasped on the desk, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "I see," he said, his tone professional yet laced with empathy. "So, you believe a DNA test is necessary to confirm the identity of the remains?" He paused, allowing the gravity of Emma's request to settle in the room. "I understand this isn't a common situation, but I can see how important this is to both you and the little girl involved." Emma nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "Yes, doctor. It's crucial that we know the truth, not just for me, but for Samantha too. She needs to know where her mother truly rests, and I need to know if it's my daughter who is actually buried there." Dr. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression one of deep thought. "Conducting a DNA test on remains is not without its challenges," he said carefully. "It will require legal authorization, which may take some time. Do you have access to the necessary documents?" Emma nodded again, determination etched into her features. "I'll start working on the documentation right away. Whatever it takes, I'll make sure we can move forward." "Good," Dr. Adrian replied, his tone now more decisive. "I will handle the preparations on my end. As soon as we have the legal clearance, we'll proceed without delay. I understand how vital it is to resolve this situation quickly, and I'll do everything in my power to help." Emma felt a surge of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you, Doctor. Your support is more comforting than you can imagine. I just hope that, with your help, we can bring peace to everyone involved." With the plan in motion, Emma left Dr. Adrian's office feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer alone in her quest for the truth. She was ready to confront whatever came next, no matter how painful the discoveries might be. That evening, Emma found herself sitting on the porch of her house, gazing absent-mindedly at the garden she and Claire had once tended together. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the flowers. Each bloom seemed to capture the last rays of sunlight, a reminder of the fleeting beauty that had once filled her life. As she waited for the DNA test results, Emma's thoughts drifted back to the past, sifting through memories like old photographs in an album. The moments she had shared with Claire, once so simple and joyful, now seemed tinged with a sense of foreboding. She replayed them in her mind, searching for clues she might have missed, hints of a truth she hadn't been able to see at the time. One memory surfaced with particular clarity an afternoon shortly before Claire's disappearance. They had been working in the garden, planting new flowers for the spring. Claire had paused, her hands buried in the soil, and looked up at Emma with an expression that seemed unusually serious. "Mom," she had said quietly, "there are things in this world that are necessary, even if they don't seem right." At the time, Emma had brushed off the comment, thinking it was just a passing thought from her introspective daughter. But now, as she sat on the porch, those words echoed in her mind with a haunting resonance. "What did you mean by that?" Emma whispered to herself, the unease gnawing at her insides. Another memory rose to the surface, one that now seemed far more significant than it had at the time. Claire had always been vibrant and present, but in those last few weeks before she disappeared, there had been moments when she seemed distant, her mind preoccupied with something she hadn't shared. Emma recalled a specific night at dinner when she had noticed a troubled look in her daughter's eyes. "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" she had asked. Claire had smiled, but it was a hollow smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything's fine, Mom," she had replied. But Emma now realized that her daughter's words had been a mask for something much deeper. "I should have pushed harder," Emma thought, guilt twisting in her chest. "I should have asked more questions." The regret weighed heavily on her, knowing that her hesitation to pry into Claire's private life might have cost her the chance to help. Then there were the phone calls. In the weeks leading up to Claire's disappearance, she had begun receiving frequent calls that seemed to fill her with a nervous energy. She would leave the room to answer them, speaking in hushed tones, her voice low and secretive. Emma had respected her daughter's privacy, never asking who was on the other end of the line. But now, she wished she had been more insistent. "Who were you talking to?" Claire Emma murmured, her voice breaking with emotion. "Who pulled you away from me?" As the memories continued to swirl in her mind, Emma began to piece together a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than she had ever imagined. The fragments of her past with Claire, once cherished moments, now seemed to hint at something darker, something that had been lurking just beneath the surface all along. It was as if she had been putting together a puzzle without realizing that key pieces were missing. And now, with each new memory, those missing pieces were revealing a truth she had been blind to for so long. A painful suspicion began to form in her heart, a gnawing fear that perhaps Claire had been caught up in something much larger and more dangerous than Emma had ever known. And as she waited for the DNA test results, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that whatever truth she uncovered would change everything she thought she knew about her daughter's life and her death. The days had dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity as Emma waited for the results of the DNA test. When the call finally came, informing her that the results were ready, she felt a mix of dread and anticipation swirling inside her. Now she sat in Dr. Adrian's office, her body rigid with tension, her hands gripping the edge of the chair, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Across the desk, Dr. Adrian carefully opened the envelope, his expression neutral, but his eyes betraying a hint of concern. "The DNA test results are here," Dr. Adrian said quietly, his voice calm but laden with the gravity of the news he was about to deliver. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She could barely hear anything over the roar of blood in her ears. "The remains we tested," Dr. Adrian continued, pausing to look directly at her, "do not match your daughter's DNA. They are not Claire's." The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. She felt dizzy, as if the very ground she stood on had been ripped away. The room spun, the walls closing in around her. "No," she whispered, her voice small and broken, as if denying the truth would somehow reverse it. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision as the crushing weight of reality settled over her. This can't be happening. It can't be true. But it was. The words echoed in her mind, each one a hammer blow to her fragile hope. Claire wasn't buried beneath that headstone. Claire wasn't resting in peace. Claire was. Where? The question rang in her mind, bringing a fresh wave of fear and confusion crashing over her. Emma blinked through the tears, forcing herself to focus, to think. "Then who is buried under my daughter's headstone?" she asked, her voice quivering with pain. "And where is Claire?" Each word was a struggle, tearing at her insides as she tried to make sense of the nightmare that had just become her reality. Dr. Adrian leaned forward, his eyes full of sympathy as he handed Emma a handkerchief. His voice was soft, filled with the weight of difficult news. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I know how devastating this must be for you. I wish I had more answers, but right now, all this does is raise more questions." Emma dabbed at her eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself against the storm of emotions flooding through her. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend the enormity of what this meant. Somewhere out there, her daughter was still lost, hidden from her in ways she couldn't yet grasp. The shock of it all threatened to consume her, but as the initial wave of despair began to recede, something stronger took its place, a fierce, burning determination. She wouldn't let this be the end of Claire's story. "I need to know what happened," Emma said, her voice finding strength despite the tremor in her hands. "I need to find out where my daughter is. I won't rest until I do." Dr. Adrian nodded, recognizing the unshakable resolve behind her words. "I understand, Emma, and I'll help you however I can. The first step is contacting the local authorities, going through any records that might give us a lead. I'd also recommend hiring a private investigator, someone who can dig deeper, follow trails that might not be immediately visible. It's going to be difficult, and we'll have to be patient, but together we'll uncover the truth." Emma stood, though her legs felt weak beneath her. Despite the fear gnawing at her, her resolve remained unbroken. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her voice quiet yet filled with a steely determination. "This is just the beginning of a long road, but I have to find her. For Claire, I'll do whatever it takes." As she stepped outside the doctor's office, the crisp air hit her face, offering a brief moment of clarity. The sky above was thick with clouds, their heavy presence echoing the turmoil within her. Yet, as she stared up at the overcast sky, Emma made a silent vow. Her lips barely moved, but her words carried the weight of her promise to herself, to Claire, to the universe. "For you, Claire, I will move mountains if I have to." The fight to uncover the truth, the fight to find her daughter, had only just begun. She knew the road ahead would be long, fraught with uncertainty and danger, but there was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Emma stood outside the office of Detective Brandon Parker. Her nerves thrummed with a mix of anxiety and determination. She had worked with Brandon before, and she knew that if anyone could help her navigate the dark, twisted paths that lay ahead, it was him. He was the steady hand she needed in this storm. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. Brandon immediately stood to greet her, his warm smile offering a glimmer of reassurance despite the seriousness in his eyes. "Mrs. Adams, it's good to see you again," he said, his voice carrying both familiarity and concern. "Please, have a seat." He gestured toward the chair in front of his cluttered desk, which was covered with files, papers, and the remnants of his current investigations. Emma sat down, her hands gripping the edge of the chair as she tried to steady her breathing. Brandon watched her with a knowing gaze, understanding the weight she carried without her needing to say a word. "What can I do for you today?" he asked gently, leaning forward, ready to listen and help. Emma met his gaze, feeling the weight of her decision to dive headfirst into this search for Claire. "Brandon," she began, her voice strong but tinged with vulnerability, "I need your help. Claire, she's still out there. I need to find her. And I don't know where to start, but I know I can't do it alone." Brandon's expression shifted from concern to resolve. He knew this wasn't just another case, it was a fight for answers, for justice, and for a mother's desperate hope. He nodded firmly, his tone matching her determination. "I'm with you, Emma. We'll find her. Whatever it takes." As they began to discuss the next steps, Emma felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. With Brandon by her side, the path ahead, though daunting, no longer seemed impossible. Together, they would unravel the mystery that had stolen her daughter, and they would bring Claire home. Emma sat down slowly, her hands clutching her bag, as if it could anchor her in the midst of the storm swirling inside her. She placed it carefully beside the chair, drawing in a deep breath to steady her voice before she spoke. "Mr. Parker, I need your help with something. Something very serious," she began, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of what she was about to say. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the fear and uncertainty that had been consuming her since the devastating discovery. "I've just found out that the remains buried in my daughter's grave, they're not hers. I need to find out where my daughter's body really is or if she's still alive." Brandon's warm, welcoming demeanor shifted immediately to one of intense focus. His gaze sharpened as he leaned forward, every muscle in his body poised for action. "That's incredibly serious, Emma," he said, his voice calm but weighted with concern. Without hesitation, he reached for a notebook and pen, ready to capture every detail she could offer. "Anything you can remember, no matter how small, could be critical in helping us start this investigation. Do you have any additional information that might shed light on what's going on?" Emma nodded slowly, her mind diving into the well of memories she had been revisiting since the DNA results came back. The days before Claire's disappearance played in her mind like a broken film reel, each scene tinged with a significance she hadn't understood at the time. After the DNA test revealed that the remains weren't Claire's, I started thinking back to those final days before she disappeared. There were strange phone calls she received, moments when she seemed distant, behaviors that didn't add up. At the time, I didn't think much of them. But now they feel like clues I missed. Brandon leaned in a little closer, his pen hovering over the page. Tell me more about these phone calls. Do you have any idea who was on the other end of the line? Are there any records of those calls? Emma bit her lip, trying to pull every detail from the recesses of her memory. She never told me who she was talking to, she began, her voice filled with regret. But I remember she would always leave the room to take the calls. She seemed nervous, almost like she was afraid of what might happen if she didn't answer. It wasn't like her to be so secretive. I should have pressed her for answers, but I didn't. I respected her privacy. Now, I wish I hadn't. Brandon quickly scribbled down her words, his mind already racing through possible scenarios and leads. Every detail she provided could be a vital piece of the puzzle they were trying to assemble. Do you still have access to Claire's phone records? He asked, his tone methodical. If we can trace those calls, we might be able to find out who she was in contact with during those final days. That could give us a lead on what happened to her. Emma nodded again, her heart pounding in her chest. I think I can get access to her phone records, she replied, her voice steadier now, infused with the determination that had driven her to seek Brandon's help in the first place. I'll do whatever it takes. Brandon's eyes met hers, and in that moment they both knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But they also knew that they had to start somewhere, and this was the first step. We'll start with the phone records, Brandon said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. And we'll go from there. Whatever it takes, Emma will find the truth. We'll find Claire. Emma shook her head, her voice filled with uncertainty. I'm not sure if I have access to those records, but I can reach out to the phone company. I'll do whatever it takes to get them. Brandon nodded, his expression resolute. Good idea. We'll start by tracking down those phone records. I'll also begin interviewing anyone who was close to Claire during that time, friends, colleagues, anyone who might have noticed something they didn't realize was important back then. Rest assured, Emma, I'll do everything in my power to find your daughter. You're not alone in this. A wave of gratitude washed over Emma, easing some of the heavy tension that had been gripping her heart since this nightmare began. She let out a deep breath, feeling a small flicker of hope rekindle inside her. Thank you, Brandon, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her emotions. Just hearing that, it gives me hope. I know this won't be easy, but with your help, I believe we'll find the truth. As Emma stepped outside the detective's office, the sun had begun to break through the thick clouds, casting a warm glow over the city streets. She looked up at the sky, feeling its soft light on her face, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with unknown dangers and challenges, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't walking it alone anymore. With Brandon by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next in her search for Claire. A few days later, Emma and Brandon found themselves sitting at a small table in a dimly lit cafe, the low hum of conversations and the gentle clinking of coffee cups creating a muted background. Between them lay a scattered array of notes, photos, and maps, each piece of paper representing another step in the growing web of evidence they were trying to untangle. Brandon leaned forward, pointing to one of the photos. It showed a group of people, some of their faces circled in red. His expression was serious, his voice hushed as he explained what he had uncovered. Emma, take a look at this, he began, tapping his finger on the photo. I managed to speak with a few of Claire's former colleagues, and from what they told me, it seemed she was getting involved with some very dangerous individuals. These people here. He pointed to the circled faces, are well-known figures in the local underworld. They're connected to high-risk, often illegal, business ventures. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the photo, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for it. The image sent a chill down her spine, the faces of these strangers suddenly looming large in her mind. "My God, Brandon," she whispered, her voice thick with fear and disbelief. "This is far more serious than I ever imagined. How? How did my daughter get involved with these people?" The words felt foreign on her tongue, as if she were speaking lines from a nightmare she hadn't yet woken from. But beneath the shock, there was a growing sense of determination. She needed to understand how Claire had ended up here, tangled in a world of danger that Emma could barely comprehend. Brandon's eyes softened as he watched Emma struggle with the enormity of what she was learning, but his focus remained sharp. He knew they couldn't afford to lose momentum now. "We're starting to piece together the puzzle," he said. "I also found out that Claire had been frequenting places that were completely out of character for her." He pulled out a map and spread it across the table, several points marked in red. These locations are often associated with illicit activities: underground bars, warehouses, shady clubs. It looks like she might have been trying to infiltrate these circles, or maybe she was coerced into them. Either way, she was deeply involved. Emma leaned over the map, studying the marked locations with a growing sense of urgency. Each name and address burned into her memory, each one a potential lead that could bring her closer to finding Claire. "We need to go to these places," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "We need to talk to more people, find out who knew Claire and what she was doing. If she was mixed up with this kind of crowd, it could be dangerous, but it could also lead us to where she is now." Brandon nodded, but the concern in his eyes deepened. He admired Emma's determination. He knew she would stop at nothing to find her daughter, but he couldn't ignore the risks they were about to face. "I agree, Emma," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But we have to do this safely. These are dangerous people, and we need to be smart about how we approach this. I'll make arrangements for us to visit these locations, but it'll be under controlled conditions. I'll also reach out to some contacts who can provide cover and help gather more intel. But I need you to promise me that you'll be careful. I don't want you to be exposed to unnecessary risks. These people, they don't play by the same rules as the rest of us." Emma met Brandon's gaze, seeing the seriousness in his eyes. She knew he was right. This wasn't just a simple investigation anymore. They were about to walk into dangerous territory, and one wrong move could cost them everything. But despite the fear that gnawed at her, she felt a steady resolve deep within her. "I promise, Brandon," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'll be careful, but I won't stop until I find out what happened to Claire. Whatever it takes, we'll get to the truth." Brandon nodded, satisfied with her answer. Together, they began to plan their next move, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the mystery that had taken Claire from them. The road ahead was dark and full of peril, but Emma and Brandon knew they had no choice but to follow it no matter where it might lead. Emma's gaze locked onto Brandon's, and he saw the unwavering resolve blazing in her eyes. There was no mistaking the fire that had replaced her earlier fear. "I understand the risks, Brandon," she said firmly, her voice laced with determination. "But nothing will stop me from finding out what happened to Claire. Whatever it takes, I'll see this through. If it means going to the ends of the earth, then that's what I'll do. I need to know the truth about Claire, about what happened to her, and I won't rest until I find it." Brandon recognized the point of no return in her words. Emma had crossed over from paralyzing fear to fierce determination, and he knew that no amount of caution would keep her from pursuing the answers she so desperately needed. She was resolute, driven by a force greater than the risks they faced. He nodded, his voice steady but filled with a deep concern. "Then we'll do this together," he said quietly, making it clear that he was committed to standing by her. "I'll make sure we get the answers you're looking for, Emma, but we'll do it smart and we'll do it safe." As they left the cafe, a heavy silence hung between them, weighted with the uncertainty of the path they were about to walk. But amidst the weight of the unknown, Emma felt an unfamiliar clarity. The fear that had once clouded her mind had given way to a singular focus. The road ahead was dark, full of shadows and hidden dangers, but she was no longer lost in it. Every step forward was a step toward the truth, toward Claire. And no matter what awaited her at the end of this journey, she knew she had to see it through, for her daughter's sake, and for her own. Later that evening, Brandon sat alone in his dimly lit office, the soft glow of his computer screen casting eerie shadows on the walls. Before him were the photos he had taken earlier at the warehouse, each face staring back at him, faceless pieces of a larger puzzle. His mind raced as he tried to connect the dots, to unravel the twisted web that might lead them closer to finding Claire. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the computer and the rhythmic ticking of the clock mounted on the wall. Then, abruptly breaking the silence, his phone rang a sharp sound that sent a jolt through the stillness. The number flashing on the screen was unknown, unfamiliar. Brandon hesitated for a moment, his instincts on high alert. This was no ordinary call. He answered cautiously, lifting the phone to his ear with a sense of readiness for whatever was about to come. "Hello," his voice was calm, controlled, but beneath the surface, his senses were finely tuned to any sign of danger. A voice responded on the other end, distorted, cold, and chilling in its detached tone. The words cut through the line like a blade, each one deliberate and menacing. "You're meddling where you don't belong. Stop this investigation now." A cold shiver coursed down Brandon's spine, a primal reaction to the unmistakable threat. But he kept his voice steady, refusing to show even a hint of fear. "Who is this?" he demanded, his tone sharp and probing. "Why do you want me to stop?" There was a brief pause, filled with tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. The voice returned, equally chilling, offering no answers, only a warning. "Walk away, detective, or you'll regret it." And with that, the line went dead. Brandon remained motionless for a moment, the phone still pressed to his ear, the silence that followed the call almost suffocating. He lowered the phone slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Whoever had called knew about the investigation, and they were willing to threaten him to make sure it ended. But if they thought intimidation would stop him, they didn't know who they were dealing with. He set the phone down, his expression hardening with resolve. The stakes had just been raised, but Brandon was more determined than ever. If anything, the threat only confirmed that they were getting closer to something or someone that wanted to stay hidden. He would need to tread carefully, but there was no turning back now. For Emma, for Claire, and for the truth, he would see this through, no matter how dangerous the path became. With renewed focus, Brandon turned back to the photos on his screen, the faces staring back at him as if daring him to continue. And continue he would. The distorted voice remained calm, almost taunting in its tone. "You ask too many questions, Detective Parker. Some things are better left buried. Walk away from this, or you'll regret it." The line went dead with an ominous click before Brandon could even respond. For a moment, he simply stared at the phone, the eerie echo of the dial tone ringing in his ear as the weight of the threat pressed down on him. His thoughts immediately raced to Emma. Whoever this was, they were watching. They knew exactly what he and Emma were doing, and they were prepared to stop them by any means necessary. Brandon exhaled slowly, trying to push back the creeping fear that threatened to take hold. Backing down wasn't an option, not now, not when they were so close to unraveling the truth. Emma had entrusted him with finding Claire, and he couldn't let her down. But he also understood the gravity of the situation they were in much deeper than either of them had anticipated, and the stakes had just skyrocketed. He quickly dialed Emma's number, his mind racing as he waited for her to pick up. The familiar sound of her voice brought him a brief moment of relief, though he could hear the fatigue behind her words. "Brandon? Did you find something?" she asked, hopeful but weary. "We've got a problem, Emma," he said, choosing his words carefully, not wanting to alarm her more than necessary. "I just received a call of threat. Someone doesn't want us continuing this investigation. They told me to walk away, or there would be consequences." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Brandon could hear Emma processing what he had just said. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, unwavering. "Whoever they are, they're scared. That means we're getting closer to something important. We can't stop now, Brandon. Not when we're this close to the truth." Brandon couldn't help but admire Emma's courage. Despite everything she had been through, despite the dangers looming over them, she remained resolute. Her love for Claire was a driving force, pushing her forward no matter the risks. "I agree," he replied, his voice firm with conviction. "But we need to be even more careful. These people aren't going to just sit back and watch us expose their secrets. They're willing to do whatever it takes to keep us from finding out what really happened to Claire." Emma's response came without hesitation. "Then we'll be ready. Whatever it takes, Brandon, we have to see this through. I can't turn back now, not after everything. We owe it to Claire." Brandon nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He admired her strength and determination, but he also felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. They were walking a dangerous path, one that could easily take a dark turn. But together they were stronger, and together they would face whatever challenges came next. "All right," Brandon said, his voice steady. "I'll step up our security measures, and we'll move forward carefully. We're not going to let them intimidate us, but we won't take any unnecessary risks either. Stay alert, Emma. I'll be in touch as soon as I have more information." Emma agreed, and after a few more words of reassurance, they ended the call. Brandon sat back in his chair, his mind already turning over the possibilities of who could be behind the threats and what they were so desperate to hide. The game had changed, but one thing remained clear: they were closer to the truth than ever before. And that meant they couldn't afford to stop now. Emma's response was immediate. "Then we do whatever it takes too. I'm not giving up on my daughter, Brandon. Not now, not ever." Brandon nodded, though she couldn't see him. "All right, we'll keep moving forward, but we'll do it smart. I'm going to bring in some additional resources, people I trust. We're not alone in this, Emma. We're going to find her, and we're going to make sure whoever's behind this doesn't get away with it." As they ended the call, Brandon couldn't shake the feeling that the investigation had just taken a darker turn. The shadows surrounding Claire's disappearance were deeper than they had imagined, and whoever was behind it had just made their presence known. But as long as Emma's determination burned bright, so would his resolve to see this through. No threat, no matter how dire, would stop them from uncovering the truth. There was a momentary silence, and then the voice responded, more menacing. "It's none of your business who we are, but if you continue, the consequences will be severe." The call was abruptly ended, leaving Brandon holding the phone, his heart beating faster with the threat. Despite the fear he felt, Brandon knew he couldn't back down now. He thought of Emma and everything she was going through. He couldn't leave her alone in this anguished search. "They are trying to intimidate us," Brandon murmured to himself, a mix of anger and determination growing within him. "But that only shows that we are on the right track. Something big is hidden, and they are desperate to keep it secret." He decided to call Emma, explaining the situation and the threats he had received. "Emma, I received a threatening call. They said to stop the investigation. I just wanted you to know." He listened carefully, waiting for her response, prepared for any sign of hesitation. Emma, on the other hand, reacted with more courage than ever. "Brandon, that's terrible, but we can't let them intimidate us. We have to continue. If they are trying to scare us, then we are getting close to the truth. Are you okay?" Her concern was evident, but her voice also carried a steely resolve. "I'm fine, Emma, and you are right. We will continue with more caution, but we won't stop," Brandon replied, feeling strengthened by her determination. Together, they agreed to take additional security measures, knowing that every step from now on would require even more courage and cunning. "Nothing will stop us, Emma. We will find out the truth," no matter what Brandon concluded, preparing for what was to come, with the certainty that the road ahead would be even more dangerous. Brandon's investigations continued. He and Emma were in his car, discreetly parked at a distance from an old, abandoned factory on the outskirts of Phoenix. The location had been mentioned in a conversation overheard by an informant Brandon kept on the streets. "This is the place, Emma. My contact said this location has been used for not very legal meetings, and he mentioned Claire's name a few times," said Brandon, watching the building with binoculars. Emma felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. "Do you think she could be there now?" she asked, trying to look through the dirty car window without being seen. "I don't know, but something big is happening here, and we have to find out what it is." Brandon's voice was low but filled with determination. "We will wait until it gets a little darker. Entering there now would be too risky." Brandon suggested, putting away the binoculars and checking to ensure his gun was secure under his coat. Emma nodded, knowing that caution was their greatest ally at that moment. Hours passed, and the daylight began to fade, plunging the building into shadows. Brandon checked his watch, then looked at Emma. "It's time. We will need to be quick and quiet. Are you ready?" Emma took a deep breath, nodding. "I'm ready. Let's find my daughter." With cautious steps, they approached the building. The door was ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to close it. Brandon entered first, with Emma right behind, both alert to any sound or movement. The interior was dark and silent, except for the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional squeak of a rat. As they explored the place, they found several signs that it had been used recently: still warm cigarettes, some food cans, and most importantly, a woman's coat that Emma recognized immediately. "This is Claire's coat. She was here," said Emma, her voice choked with emotion. Brandon placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support. "We are close, Emma. We will find out what happened," he affirmed, as they continued searching the building, hopeful and alert. Brandon and Emma advanced carefully through the dark corridor of the factory when they heard low voices coming from a lit room ahead. Brandon signaled for Emma to be quiet, and they approached the slightly open door. Silently hidden, they saw a woman with her back turned, talking to another person who was out of sight. Emma watched intently, her heart pounding. "Claire," she whispered to herself, her voice laden with emotion as she recognized the posture and gestures of the woman. Unable to contain herself, she stepped forward, entering the room. "Claire," she called out, her voice louder than she intended. The woman turned sharply, surprised and on alert. "Who are you? How do you know that name?" she quickly asked, with clear defensiveness in her voice, trying to see who was calling her. Emma stopped, feeling a wave of emotion upon seeing her daughter's face, even though it had been altered by time and circumstances. "It's me, Emma, your mother," she said, approaching slowly, her hands extended in a gesture of peace. "Please, Claire, I know it's you. We have been looking for you for so long." Tears began to form in Emma's eyes, her voice trembling with every word. Claire hesitated, looking at Emma with a mix of confusion and recognition. "Mom," she finally murmured, the resistance in her gaze beginning to fade. Claire looked at Emma, her eyes filled with emotion and a glimpse of fear. "Mom, you shouldn't be here," she said with a trembling voice. "It's too dangerous. You need to leave. I can't risk something happening to you too." Emma, firm and unyielding, approached Claire, holding her hands gently. "I am not going anywhere, Claire. I won't let you face this alone. Wherever you are is where I need to be too." We are in this together, no matter what." Claire tried to protest, the worry evident on her face. "Mom, please, I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Emma squeezed Claire's hands, looking directly into her eyes. "There is no place in the world I would rather be than by your side. Nothing will take me away from you, my daughter. We will resolve this together." Claire, seeing the determination in her mother's eyes, knew that arguing would be futile. With tear-filled eyes, she slowly nodded. "I had to do this, Mom. I had to disappear. It was the only way to protect all of us," she whispered, her voice laden with pain and regret. Emma approached and hugged Claire, holding her tightly. "None of that matters now. What matters is that you are alive, and we can help you. We can protect you," Emma said, comforting her daughter. Brandon, observing the scene, remained alert, knowing they might still face dangers, but relieved to have finally found Claire and brought some peace to Emma. Sitting in a discreet corner of the same abandoned building, Emma and Claire were having an intense conversation. Claire began to explain, her face showing traces of fatigue and worry. "Mom, when I got involved with these people, I didn't know how far it would go. It started with small favors, things that seemed harmless. But then I realized I was in something much bigger and more dangerous than I could have imagined." Emma listened, her heart tightening with each word. "They started threatening my friends, our family. I was scared, Mom. They told me the only way to ensure everyone's safety was if I disappeared. So we planned my fake death." Claire paused, swallowing hard, the pain evident in her eyes. "I didn't know what else to do. I went far away, changed my identity, everything, to protect the people I love. I wanted to tell the truth, but every move I made was monitored. Only recently did I manage to get a bit of breathing room. But even so, it's not a real life." Claire sighed, resignation weighing on each word. Emma held Claire's hands, her own hands trembling. "Claire, my dear, what you went through. I can hardly imagine. But now that we know the truth, we can help you. We will find a way to end this, to bring you back home." Her voice was firm, trying to infuse some hope into the desperate situation. Emma sat with Claire, feeling the weight of her daughter's words pressing down on her heart. Claire's eyes were filled with exhaustion and fear, the burden of years in hiding weighing her down. "I'm so tired," Mom, Claire whispered, her voice barely holding back tears. "Tired of hiding, of living in fear. I just want to go home, but I'm afraid of the consequences my return might bring to all of us." Emma's heart ached for her daughter, but she also felt a sting of pain knowing that Claire had gone through this alone. Still, now was not the time for recriminations. They needed to focus on moving forward. "Claire, what you did was incredibly risky, and I'm hurt that you felt you had to do this without telling me. But right now, we need to focus on resolving this situation," Emma said, her voice a mixture of pain and determination. Claire stared down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. The fear, regret, and uncertainty of facing her mother and the repercussions of her choices weighed heavily on her. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Claire said, her voice a fragile whisper. "I thought I was protecting our family, but I see now that I only made things worse." Emma reached for Claire's hands, her grip firm and comforting. "We will figure this out together. We need a lawyer, someone who can help us navigate the legal issues that come with your return," Emma said, her mind already racing ahead to the practical steps they needed to take. "And we'll have to talk to the police. You'll need to explain everything, why you faked your death, what you were running from." Claire nodded, tears forming in her eyes as the reality of the situation sank in. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know if I deserve all this effort after everything I've done, but I'm so grateful you're here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Emma squeezed her daughter's hands tightly. "You're my daughter, Claire. That's all that matters. We'll get through this together. It's going to be hard, and it will take time, but we've always been strong, and we'll stay strong now." Emma knew that supporting Claire wouldn't just be about legal and logistical matters. They both needed emotional support, and Claire would have to face the trauma of her years in hiding. We'll also find a therapist, someone who can help you process everything you've been through. Emma said softly, "You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." Claire's tears spilled over as she nodded again, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, wiping her eyes. The bond between them, once strained by fear and uncertainty, now began to mend, strengthened by their shared determination to rebuild what had been lost. The days that followed were a blur of meetings with lawyers, discussions with the police, and sessions with a therapist. Claire's return was anything but easy, but with Emma by her side, she felt supported for the first time in years. One afternoon, as Emma sat in the quiet of their home, the phone rang. She hesitated, a wave of anxiety washing over her. The shadow of danger still loomed over them, and each call brought with it the possibility of bad news. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the receiver. "Hello," she answered, her voice unsteady. On the other end, a distorted voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You and your detective are meddling where you shouldn't. Drop this, or the consequences will be severe." Emma's heart raced as fear gripped her. She fought to keep her voice calm. "I don't know what you're talking about. We're just trying to help my daughter," she responded, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. The voice on the other end was cold and menacing. "Listen carefully. This is bigger than you imagine. If you continue, we cannot guarantee your safety or that of your loved ones." With that, the line went dead, leaving Emma holding the phone, her body frozen in fear. When Brandon arrived later that evening, Emma immediately told him about the call. Her voice trembled with worry, and her expression was one of deep concern. "Brandon, they threatened me. They told me to stop, that we're in over our heads. I'm scared of what they might do. Maybe we should stop this." Brandon looked at Emma, his face serious but calm. He could see the fear in her eyes, the weight of the threat pressing down on her. "Emma," he said gently, "I understand how scary this is. But stopping now won't protect you or Claire. If anything, it might make things worse. We need to stay the course, but we'll do it smartly. I'll increase security around you both. We're not backing down, but we'll be prepared for whatever comes." Emma nodded, trying to steady herself, but the fear lingered. "I trust you, Brandon. I don't want anything to happen to Claire. She's been through so much already." Brandon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Emma. I'll make sure of it. Whoever's behind these threats, behind everything, they won't succeed. We'll protect Claire, and we'll uncover the truth." Emma took a deep breath, finding strength in Brandon's resolve. "Okay," she said, her voice firmer now. "We'll keep going. For Claire." And so, despite the growing threats and the looming danger, Emma and Brandon continued their fight for the truth, knowing that they couldn't give up, not now and not ever. Brandon leaned forward, his expression one of deep focus as he weighed Emma's concerns against the urgency of their mission. "Emma," he began gently but firmly, "I completely understand your fear, and it's justified. But if we stop now, the people who threatened you will continue to operate in the shadows, unpunished. We have to be cautious, yes. But we can't let fear be the thing that halts us. I'm here with you every step of the way, and will do everything as safely as possible." His words, filled with quiet determination, brought a small sense of comfort to Emma, who nodded slowly, knowing that the path forward, though dangerous, was necessary if they were ever to uncover the truth about Claire. In the days that followed the phone threat, Emma and Brandon decided it was time to step up their precautions. They met at a local cafe, far from the prying eyes of the places they usually frequented. They chose a secluded corner, away from the main bustle of the cafe, ensuring they could speak freely without fear of being overheard. The air around them felt thick with tension, but there was also an unspoken resolve shared between them. "We need to be more strategic," Brandon said, his eyes scanning the room as he lowered his voice. "I'll reach out to some trusted colleagues who can help us reinforce security. We'll install surveillance at your home, and we'll make sure we're prepared for any potential threats." Emma nodded, though her heart felt heavy. "I trust you, Brandon," she replied quietly, her voice tinged with worry. "But I can't shake the fear that more people might get hurt because of me. It's bad enough that I'm already involved in this mess. I don't want to see anyone else suffer because of it." Her concern was clear, etched into every line of her face. The weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, knowing that the danger now extended beyond herself and her daughter. Brandon reached across the table, his gaze steady as he spoke with conviction. "I understand, Emma. I won't let anything happen to you. We're going to find out who's behind these threats and why they're so desperate to keep us from the truth. And when we do, we'll make sure they pay for everything they've done." Emma looked into Brandon's eyes, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the fear. His confidence was contagious, and she clung to it, knowing that despite the danger, she wasn't alone in this fight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without your help." Brandon smiled softly, though his eyes remained serious. "You're stronger than you realize, Emma. We'll get through this together." With a renewed sense of purpose, they finalized their plans, taking every precaution they could. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with risks and unknowns, but Emma knew that turning back was no longer an option. Whatever lay ahead, she was prepared to face it with Brandon by her side, and the truth as their guiding light. The detective carefully reached into his pocket and retrieved his phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad for a moment before dialing a number with deliberate precision. His eyes remained vigilant, scanning their surroundings as the phone rang on the other end. After a few tense moments of silence, a voice finally answered. Brandon lowered his voice to a near whisper as he explained the gravity of the situation, choosing his words with care as he requested immediate assistance. When the call ended, he took a deep breath and allowed his shoulders to relax slightly. He turned to Emma with a softer, more reassuring expression. "My colleagues will begin night patrols near your house," Brandon said gently, his tone carrying the promise of protection. "And tomorrow, a close friend of mine, who's an expert in security systems, will come by to install cameras and alarms. We're going to make sure you're safe, Emma." Emma felt a flood of relief wash over her, the tightness in her chest easing for the first time in days. The idea of not facing this terrifying ordeal alone brought her a fragile sense of peace. She reached out, briefly holding Brandon's hands in hers, a simple yet powerful gesture that conveyed her immense gratitude and the growing bond between them. "Thank you, Brandon. I don't know what I'd do without your help," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. With the new security measures firmly in place, Emma and Brandon redoubled their efforts to continue the investigation. They spent countless hours poring over evidence, making phone calls, and following up on leads. The days blurred into nights, with both of them often working into the early hours of the morning, driven by their determination to uncover the truth. Despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on their bodies, neither of them wavered in their resolve. Weeks of relentless work finally paid off when they managed to gather enough solid evidence to build a case against the gang responsible for Claire's fake disappearance and the ominous threats that had followed. The evidence they had compiled was extensive, everything from incriminating documents to damning audio recordings and surveillance footage. These materials not only linked the gang members to a series of criminal activities, but also provided undeniable proof of their involvement in Claire's ordeal. Brandon knew they had reached a critical juncture, so he carefully reached out to a specialized police unit that dealt with organized crime and corruption. Arranging a secret meeting at a discreet and secure location, far from any potential eavesdroppers, Brandon and Emma handed over the treasure trove of evidence they had painstakingly collected. As they explained how each piece of the puzzle fit together, the officers from the specialized unit listened intently, clearly impressed by the thoroughness of their investigation. The authorities wasted no time in launching an operation to dismantle the criminal organization. With the help of a tactical team, they executed a series of carefully coordinated raids on the gang's various hideouts, catching the criminals off guard. The swift and efficient operation led to the arrest of numerous gang members, including several high-ranking leaders who had been pivotal in orchestrating the crimes. Additional evidence was seized during the raids, further solidifying the case against the gang. When the news of the successful arrests reached Emma, she was overcome with a profound sense of relief. Tears of gratitude welled up in her eyes as the weight of the past weeks seemed to lift from her shoulders. She turned to Brandon, her voice filled with emotion. "We did it, Brandon. After everything we've been through, justice has finally been served." Brandon stood beside her, sharing in her sense of accomplishment. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and offered a warm smile. "You were incredible, Emma. Your strength and determination were the key to making this happen. We wouldn't have gotten this far without you." Together they watched as the judicial process began to unfold. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder that their tireless efforts had made a real difference. Not only had they helped bring dangerous criminals to justice, but they had also honored Claire's struggle and her desire to protect her family. A few days later, after the dust had settled and the immediate danger had passed, Claire, Emma, and Brandon gathered at a cozy little cafe to celebrate their hard-fought victory. As they sat around the table, sipping their drinks, Claire reached out to take both Emma's and Brandon's hands. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at them with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "I never thought we'd make it here," Claire began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mom, Brandon, I owe you both so much. Without your courage and your belief in me, I don't know if I could have survived this. You didn't just fight for me, you gave me the chance to rebuild my life." Emma smiled at her daughter, her heart full of love and pride. She squeezed Claire's hand gently and spoke with the quiet conviction of a mother's unwavering devotion. "Claire, you're my daughter. There's nothing in this world I wouldn't do for you. Seeing you safe and knowing that justice has been done. That's all I ever wanted." Brandon nodded in agreement, his own emotions shining through. "It's been a long and difficult journey, Claire, but you've shown incredible strength throughout this entire process. Helping you and your mother has been a privilege. I'm just so relieved that everything ended well." Claire's tears finally spilled over as she looked at the two people who had stood by her side through the darkest moments of her life. "You both gave me the strength to keep going when everything seemed so hopeless. All I want now is to live a life that honors all the sacrifices you made for me." Emma and Brandon exchanged a glance, their hearts full of warmth and mutual respect. "There's no need to thank us," Emma said softly. "We're family, and families take care of each other, no matter what." Brandon nodded again, a smile playing on his lips. "Exactly, and now we move forward together." These moments of shared gratitude and acknowledgement deepened the bond between them, reinforcing their commitment to one another and to the future they would face as a united front. Back at the cemetery, the place where so much pain and confusion had begun, Emma and Claire walked side by side through the rows of graves. The air was heavy with a respectful silence, and the overcast sky seemed to mirror the bittersweet emotions in their hearts. Emma held a new plaque in her hands, the metal cool against her skin as she prepared to set things right. "We're here to do what's right," Emma said quietly, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. "It's time to correct the mistakes of the past and honor the truth." Claire nodded, her face etched with both sadness and resolution. Together they carefully removed the old headstone and installed the new plaque. As they stepped back to admire their work, the name Anna Lewis stood proudly, finally giving the woman who had been wrongly buried there her rightful identity. Claire knelt beside the grave, gently placing a bouquet of fresh flowers at its base. Her voice trembled with both sorrow and relief as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, Anna, for everything that happened." She then turned to her mother, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and regret. "Thank you, Mom, for standing by me, even when I didn't deserve it." Emma embraced Claire tightly, her love and forgiveness wrapping around her daughter like a protective shield. "We face this together, and that's what matters. What's important is that you're here now, and we've made things right. That's what families do, they stand by each other, no matter what." As they walked away from the grave, they left behind not only the painful memories but also a chapter of their lives that they were finally ready to close. Together they stepped into the future, stronger and more united than ever before. As life gradually returned to normal and the intensity of the investigation faded into the background, Jorge and Claire found themselves growing closer. They began to open up to each other more fully, sharing their fears, their hopes, and the scars left behind by their experiences. One quiet afternoon, after a long session of reviewing documents and making plans for the future, they found themselves sitting together at a small cafe, enjoying a rare moment of calm. Jorge looked at Claire with admiration, noticing the determination that burned within her. "Claire, I've always known you were strong," he said earnestly, his voice filled with respect. "But seeing how fiercely you fought for your family, it's made me admire you even more." Claire smiled, touched by his words. "Thank you, Jorge. It's been a long and difficult journey, but knowing I'm not alone, that I have you, Emma, and Samantha by my side has made all the difference. Your support has given me the strength to keep going." As their meetings became more frequent, Jorge found his feelings for Claire deepening. One afternoon, as they strolled through a nearby park, he realized he could no longer keep those feelings inside. He stopped walking, turning to face her, his heart racing as he prepared to speak. "Claire," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've started to feel something more for you. Over these past months, you've become such an important part of my life." Claire paused, her breath catching in her throat as Jorge's words sank in. The surprise that had initially frozen her quickly melted into warmth, and her heart swelled with a happiness she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. "I feel the same way, Jorge," she said softly, her voice tender but filled with sincerity. "I've been afraid to say anything because I didn't want to complicate things, but I'm so relieved you feel the same." As a smile spread across her face, Claire allowed herself to embrace the joy of this new beginning, no longer weighed down by the fears of the past. With the mystery of the headstones finally resolved and peace returning to their lives, Jorge and Claire were able to fully explore the love that had quietly blossomed between them. The challenges they had faced together had forged a deep bond, one that strengthened with each passing day. Surrounded by the support of those they cared about, they now felt ready to step into the future with hope and optimism. Emma and Samantha watched with joy as Jorge and Claire's relationship flourished. After enduring so much heartache, happiness had once again found its way into their lives. For Emma, seeing her daughter find love and comfort after all she had been through was the greatest gift she could have ever asked for. She had witnessed Claire's struggles, her heartbreak, and her resilience, and now, seeing her daughter smile again felt like a blessing she hadn't dared hope for. One sunny afternoon, the four of them gathered at the park, a place that had come to symbolize new beginnings. Emma sat on a bench, basking in the warmth of the sun, as she watched Claire and Samantha play soccer on the grass. The sound of their laughter filled the air, mingling with the rustling of the trees, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. The weight that had once pressed so heavily on her shoulders seemed to lift, replaced by a lightness she hadn't known in years. Eventually, Claire joined her mother on the bench, her face glowing with happiness and a calm contentment that had been missing for too long. "It's good to see us like this," Emma said softly, glancing at her daughter with a smile. "It feels like we can finally breathe again, like we've left the past behind us." Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful yet serene. "Mom, I wouldn't have made it through everything without you and Samantha. She's brought us even closer together, and I'm so grateful for that. She feels like the daughter I never had." At that moment, Samantha came running over, her face flushed with excitement and her eyes shining with joy. "Grandma, come play with us," she called out, her enthusiasm contagious. Emma couldn't help but laugh, feeling a youthful energy she hadn't experienced in years. "Of course, darling," she said with a playful grin. "Let's see if I can still keep up with you two." Rising from the bench, she followed Samantha back to the field, her heart lighter than it had been in a long, long time. Claire watched them for a moment, her heart brimming with gratitude. She could hardly believe how far they had come, how much they had overcome together. "You know, Mom," she said as she joined them on the field, "I think we've finally figured out what truly matters. No matter what we've been through, we're together now, and that's what counts." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park and painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, the three of them walked home hand in hand. Emma looked at Claire and Samantha, her heart overflowing with love and a fierce sense of protection. She squeezed their hands gently, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "We're in this together," she said, her words a quiet vow. "As a family." And so, step by step, they continued their journey of healing and rebuilding. Stronger and more united than ever before, they faced whatever the future held, knowing that no matter what challenges came their way, they had each other to lean on. Together they were unstoppable. Together they would keep moving forward, one step at a time. What have you learned from this story? We encourage you to reflect on the emotions and lessons shared in this video. Comment below on one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into practice in your own life. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel